In this video, I'm going to show you a workflow for generating a human model in Blender, clothing it, posing it, and 3D printing it. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I have videos already that go into detail for the steps that we're going to have a look at here. However, this is the last in a series, and if you want to refer to the detailed videos, I will leave links below and probably cards at the end if I remember. The goal here is to go from this cube to a model that looks something like this. I'm going to cover all the steps, but not in much detail, although it will be detailed enough and easy enough to follow if you don't have a lot of experience of doing this kind of thing. The only thing I won't cover is the painting, but if you want to see something about painting, here's a little video of me not painting this model. Now, the first thing we need to do is to get Blender to generate a human model for us, and I'm going to use charmorph here. If you want to look at one of the other ways, you can refer to the first video in this series. But to get started, let's delete all this. A, X, delete. There we go. So I'm going to go into the N panel, go to charmorph, and I have a lot of options in here, as we know, but I need to select import character here. And there we go. We have a lovely model with the very fetching underwear on. But other than that, she looks fine. One of the strange things with charmorph is that the character that is created is really small, and this can cause some problems with some animation that we might want to do later. You can see this if I go into the item tab, and if you look over here at the Z height, you can see she's very, very small, just 1.75 millimeters high. That's not good enough. Unfortunately, with charmorph, you have to finalize the model before you can scale it because you can't scale the rig afterwards. So let's go down here looking for the finalize option and click it. This might take a little bit of time. There you go. Now what we need to do is select everything, the rig and the underwear and the model herself, and scale her up by pressing S. I will look at this little Z thing over here to get it up to around about 100 millimeters or 10 centimeters. There you go. That seemed unnecessarily difficult, but now she seems a reasonable size. I think we'll just turn the rig off now by clicking the little eye icon over here. And now we have something we can work with. Now, it's a good habit to get into, and it's not absolutely necessary, but I think it's important to put face sets on the model. This can really help with sculpting later, if you need to do it. So we're going to have to go into sculpt mode to do this, but it's very simple. So let's go into sculpt mode by clicking over here, selecting sculpt mode, and we want to select the face sets brush, which is this little thing here. Select it. Our goal is to put face sets on the arms and the legs. So put the mouse over a leg, turn mirroring off, and press Shift W, and you move the mouse up the leg. Press 2 if it's going to overflow onto the other leg, like it did there. 2 will follow the topology. Now we do the same with the other leg. Shift and W, drag the mouse up, and press 2. That's fantastic. You might not have the same colors as I do. And now we'll just do the arms. And there we go. Now if I look at the back of this model, we'll see that the face sets haven't gone exactly where we want to do, so we'll fix those. You hold Control down while putting the mouse over a face set and paint. This will extend the face set that you're working on. Okay, so I will just do the other one, Control and paint. And then I'll touch up in the areas that I missed out. There you go. Now I like to smooth out the rough edges of the face sets that you can see here. And the way to do that is by selecting the mesh filter brush, which is down here somewhere. There it is. Select that and go up to the filter type up here and select relax face sets. And now we just drag the mouse to the right with the left mouse button down, and it smooths out the facets like that. If you want to learn a little bit more about facets and why we might use them for sculpting, then have a look at my video on posing a human figure, which is linked below. Now the next step is to add some clothes to this model. For this video, I'm only going to demonstrate putting a skirt on her, and we're going to use quite a simple way of doing that. If you want to look at more ways of adding clothes, then please check out my video on putting clothes on your Blender generated model. Now let's just go back into object mode. Now, as this is going to be pretty much the same dress as I did in my video on clothing human models, I'm going to go through this really quickly. We'll add a cylinder, and we're going to try and make it fit nicely over her stomach. Like so. Scale it a little on the Z, and remove the top and bottom faces. And now we will select the top loop of vertices, and if you remember from the previous video, we will create a vertex group by clicking this little triangle and pressing the plus up here and renaming this to pin. This is going to be a pin group that will hold our skirt right up here when we do the cloth simulation. Don't forget to assign. So basically now we're going to select the bottom loop here, scale it out a little bit, and we're going to extrude this dress down the leg of this model. Now you may notice that I have a shrink wrap modifier sitting here. I don't use it in the end, but I leave it here anyway. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. In this particular case, I didn't. So now we're going to do a cloth simulation on this dress, and we have to put a subdivision surface modifier on so we can get a little bit more geometry for it. Now select the model and go to the Physics tab, and we will give her a collision so that the dress doesn't go straight through her. Now we want to attach the dress to the rig so that we can pose the model afterwards. Now, as this is covered in the previous video I mentioned, this is just a case of parenting the dress to the rig and adding a data transfer modifier. So I'll speed this bit of the video up. If you'd like more details on doing this, then have a look at my video on 4 ways to clothe a Blender model, which is linked below. Okay, let's just pop into pose mode and check that that's done correctly. Select this bone maybe and wiggle it about. Now we need to add the cloth simulation to this dress, and we will run it. But I'll speed this up again, and as I mentioned before, if you want details, you can refer to the video on clothing humans for Blender. So let's reset the play head and press play and see what we have. This can take a long time, depending on your machine. I think I'll speed this up again. It's worth pointing out that the cloth modifier should be below the armature modifier and not as I have it here. Okay, you can see that I have created a top for this model as well and made a few adjustments to the dress as well actually. So now what we want to do is to pose the model. Now we want to pose the model in a way that allows the cloth simulation of the dress to work and respect our pose. And the way to do that is to use the animation features of Blender. So we're going to animate our model from standing position into the final pose. With our rig selected, we'll first go into pose mode. Now I'm going to give our model a nice little thing to sit on. I will give her this cube, which will also need to have collision set to on so that the dress doesn't go through it when she sits down. So first we're going to select the rig and go back into pose mode. And then we will select all of the bones with A. And now we press I and select location and rotation, and we will have set a keyframe for this position. That means that Blender now knows the position of all the bones in this model. So when we move the timeline forward by, say, 30 or 40 frames, and we move all these bones, Blender can calculate the difference between this position and the point at which we end up. And then we'll have a smooth animation. Okay, so the first step will be to move the timeline on some distance. So all we need to do is open this little window and select somewhere like this. That would do. Take a quick look at this diamond shape here. These diamonds represent keyframes on the timeline. These can be moved around and edited to adjust the animation, but that's not so important when we're just trying to get clothing to look good. As it may take some time for the cloth simulation to work out our positions when we've moved this model, I'm going to change this number here, which is the length of time of the animation. It may come in handy later if we go over 250 frames. So let's do it. Let's grab this bone, and it's easier if I look on the x-axis, I think, and start pulling it down into position. Don't worry if the clothes don't go with it. They will do. There you go. It looks very nice sitting on this cube. Now I'm just going to make a few adjustments to this pose. I'll speed it up a bit. Ordinarily, I'd sculpt those legs to look a little better, but there's going to be a dress over this, so it doesn't really matter. But basically, this looks okay. So we're going to select all of the bones again, and we're going to press I, location and rotation. And that'll put another keyframe here, as you can see. If we press this button, we will go back to the first frame, actually standing up again. And we can turn the dress on, because I turned it off for some reason, and press play. And she will sit down and the dress will go with her. I'll speed this up because it takes a bit of time. We don't worry about small problems like you can see her body through a lot of the dress, and maybe there's some problems with some normals. We will fix those when we come to clean up at the end of this process. Right, I'm going to press stop on the animation now because I'm pretty happy with the result. Apart from the arms, we'll fix those afterwards. But if we have a quick look around this model, we can see lots of little issues, but we will fix them. And a big issue, her underpants didn't have a collision on them, so her dress went straight through it. But that doesn't matter, we can just turn that off. Okay, much better. Now, as I didn't want the arms to get in the way while the dress was doing its thing, the arms are sticking up in the air. So the next step will be to move these arms into a nice pose, and I will speed this up. And of course, if you want more details on posing a rig like this, then you can look at my video on posing a human model, which is linked below and at the end. So I think this will do us. If I'd posed these arms and they interfered with the dress at all, then I would have to keyframe everything again in this position and then reset and press play so that the cloth simulation on the dress could account for the change in the arms. But fortunately it didn't, so I don't have to do that. So now let's clean this model up. There are several issues. For example, the shoulders here seem to be sticking through the top. If we look over here, there's some bits poking through the dress and some strange wrinkles up underneath the arms. We should probably also take away this cube for a moment just to see if there's any odd problems behind as well. Nothing that isn't already a problem. But now we don't really need the rig, so let's turn it off. Now we don't have to do this, but I always find it a lot easier if I apply all the modifiers that I'm using. I've decided my pose is okay now. I'm not going to need the rig. I'm not going to need anything. So now I want to apply everything. If you apply everything by just going through the modifier stack for all of the objects and applying all your modifiers, even if you do it in the right order, you'll find that the model is horribly broken, almost certainly. So we're going to apply all the modifiers in a different way. Quicker too. Select the model and shift select all the other clothing and articles and anything else that you want to get involved in this, and go up into object and go down to convert mesh. And that's a little bit counterintuitive, but now everything is applied and nothing's broken. So let's fix everything. Now I'm going to start with the top here and get rid of these wrinkles and bits and pieces. And we're going to do that in sculpting. So go into sculpt mode and start fixing. As this is a workflow video rather than an in-depth tutorial, I will speed this up a little bit and you can follow along if you want to. And for those that get a little bit bored, I'll put some entertainment on the screen. But if you do want me to go through this kind of thing in more detail, then please let me know in the comments. Okay, here we are, and we've got some bra sticking out. I can't stress enough how much I don't recommend using the non-adult mode with charmorph. But anyway, we'll fix that by sculpting the bra, just using the snake hook and pushing the bits in we don't want to be there. Okay, so let's go back into object mode and start working on this dress. And if you'd like to see in more details what I'm doing with this dress, then please let me know in the comments. Okay, that's done. So go into object mode. And now we're going to add a solidify modifier to this dress to give it some thickness so that it might actually print. I'll increase the thickness over here. And that looks about right. Maybe a little bit thin, but we'll see. Now, if we look over here, we'll see that I didn't use the shrink wrap modifier and the dress doesn't quite touch the body. So what I'm going to do is to go into sculpt mode and use the snake hook brush and just push the dress so that it just intersects the body. That'll make it easier to print. I find doing it this way is actually a bit more reliable than using the shrink wrap modifier. So this looks good enough. And now we'll go back into object mode. The position of the fingers here is not exactly what I would like. So I'm going to make a couple of changes to the fingers as well. And I'm going to use sculpting and I'm going to use the pose brush. I will be doing a video on the pose brush in the future. And if you'd like that to be the near future, then please let me know in the comments below. But for now, I'm just going to show it and speed up the video. Okay, that's good. Now we're going to add a solidify modifier to the top that she's wearing. And I'll increase the thickness so that it just intersects straight into the body. Doesn't really matter. We're 3D printing this. And I think we're done now. So next up is we'll export this as an STL, import it into a slicer, and then print. Now, the really observant amongst you would have noticed that my model now has hair and a hat. The hat was just something I had lying around, and the hair was something I quickly modelled. There's a lot of ways of modelling hair, and a lot of people are much better at doing it than I am. But all I did for this was create a plane, wrap it around her head, and then in sculpt mode did a lot of inflating with the inflate brush, and then drew little lines down her hair. It's good enough for my purposes here. So to export this, we have to select everything that we want to export, and I don't want to actually export the cube here, so I'll need to turn that off. So I'll click visibility in the outliner, click, and we'll turn X-ray mode on, which is this little button over here. And this just makes it easier to select everything. So press A to select everything, May as well turn off X-ray mode again, and then we go into File, Export, and STL. It's important to select this selection only box over here and to make sure you have apply modifiers on here. Then change the name to whatever is suitable, put it in the right directory and press export. So now we can leave Blender and go to our slicer. There are two popular slicers for slicing for resin printing, which is what we're doing here. And one of them is Chitubox and the other one is Lychee, Lychee. I call it Lychee. Everyone I know calls it Lychee, but the company calls it Lychee. I will probably keep calling it Lychee. Anyway, that's my preferred slicer. But the features of Chitubox are pretty much the same. There's one or two features in Lychee that I prefer, and that's why I use it. But we're not going to go into great detail here. I'm just going to cover the basics that you need to know to slice successfully in order to 3D print this model. And for that purpose, it doesn't really matter which slicer we use. So I'm going to drag the STL that we created in Blender onto Lychee, and it's going to load it up, and there it is. If I select it, she goes red because it still found a few errors, but we can fix them by pressing this Repair 3D Model button here. Chitubox will automatically repair it as you load something in, and it's pretty good at it too. So we had no errors remaining, so that's great. First thing we need to do is orientate the model. Our goal is to have the fewest amount of overhangs, as well as nice gentle angles. We don't need to put in as many supports. Using Lychee's rotate tool over here, I will rotate her perhaps like this. And now we're happy with her. We can save a bit of resin by making her hollow. In Lychee we do this over here, and after a moment we have a hollow model, as you can see here. There's the holes. Now there will be uncured resin in there when she's printed, so we have to drill holes in her in places that you can't see in order for that resin to drain out. And I shall speed that process up for you here. If you do want a video on supporting a model in Lychee, then again, please let me know in the comments. And I'm going to place two holes down at the bottom where you won't be able to see them, and I will put some holes on the internal walls as well, so that all the resin inside has a chance to come out. Okay, so that's great. Now the next job is to add supports. This is a bit of a dark art. I do them manually. A lot of people use auto supports. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but personally I find the manual ones easier. So I'm just going to race through these and we'll have something at the end which hopefully will print. Now this is probably way more supports than she actually needed, to be honest, but it will make sure she prints. It will just mean taking the supports off is a little bit annoying. So now we have the model fully supported and hollowed. We just need to slice her and take her to the printer. So here's the slicing operation in Lychee. It's actually a bit slow in Lychee. It's quicker in Chitubox, but it's kind of more relaxing watching it, doing it here. I'm not going to watch it do this here, but when it's finished, we will export to a USB stick and we will take it over to our printer, which in my case is going to be a Frozen Sonic Mini 4K. And now we just bake on 200 degrees. So here she is, all ready for printing. In the corners of this video, you can see links to the other videos in the series, the ones that do everything in more detail. But I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. And thank you very much.